It's been a long day. Been a long day today, Luke.
Happy Liberation Day.
Happy Liberation
Been
Day.
a rough day for you in the markets.
What
was so bad about
markets
it?
goes up, they go down. It was one for the history books, I think, for sure. I think just end of day, it's like S&P 500 worst down day since the COVID shock. Once you're back into COVID territory, it's like something's going on.
You like
Liberation Day in America, April 2nd. Today's April 3rd. April 2nd, 2025, Liberation Day. What are we getting liberated from?
We know.
I can't quite remember, but we're getting liberated.
We're learning what it is. So originally, I think we thought it was fentanyl. I think like one of the biggest takeaways, and we're just going to jump right into it, I would say. And the reason for the huge market, in my take, in my estimation, the big reason for the market drop has to do with the realization that these tariffs that we had on this program had said, and I think the general market consensus was that they were political. This is just speaking personally here. We thought they were political.
Various,
right? They said
of tariff videos.
Yeah, the way he was talking about him was in the context of Canada and Mexico, and using the tariffs to get them to the table to shut down fentanyl and drugs.
And like even before that, it's like based on the migrant crisis with threats to Colombia, and even separately, like different politics with Venezuela,
right?
Most recently too.
And he was kind of delaying the tariffs being, depending on how well these negotiations went. And we're like, okay, these are political.
Like bargaining chips. It's like
these are bargaining chips. It's like get to the table, and we're going to hit a whole bunch of.
All right, he wants us to do something, but it'll be fine. It's too crazy. Right. What he's saying is too crazy.
So the market's like, okay, these aren't serious. And what we found out yesterday is that these are not political tariffs; they are economic ones.
He's deadly serious.
He's deadly serious, and these are utilized. The point of these now, I think it's very clear that they are to zero out the trade deficit. America runs huge trade deficits across the board, and we're going to put in as much tariffs as high as we need for as long as we need to zero out the trade deficit. It's not political; they're economic, and that's huge. And that once they saw that, then the markets got scared. A change in reality.
Yeah, and in fact, it's like I think he had to do this, but he declared a national emergency, which he's done multiple so far at this point. But basically, just to rule by executive order, pretty much. That's the mechanism through which he went. So now there's other questions like Congress is trying to challenge that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more drama about that over the coming days and weeks.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steelworkers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen. That was the worst trade deal ever made. As a result of these gigantic losses, foreign nations now own $26 trillion more of American assets than the Americans own of their own foreign assets or other foreign assets.
What he's speaking to, back to our Econ 101 days, and we covered it actually here on episode 11. So the Teal Talks Trump Tariffs, that episode, he's referring to the balance of accounts between countries. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He's getting thrown in some economics into, in between the rape talks. But the other thing with the reciprocal tariffs, I thought was interesting. So he went through that entire report. There's a foreword which sort of summarizes all the ways in which there are different trade barriers that have nothing to do with tariffs. And then there are like 60 or so different countries in which they detail at each country the different ways in which they erect trade barriers. Sometimes they're just kind of the friction of doing business across borders. There are the technical barriers to trade. So they talked about unnecessary trade standards, conformity assessments, technical regulations. They mentioned sanitary and phytosanitary measures.
Yeah, I saw that. That was kind of interesting. I
That was
didn't even know
all of
that
these are
word.
really interesting. Like, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on here because these aren't something
Mhm.
that we ever talk or think about.
Yeah.
That they talk about measures in the phytosanitary and sanitary that restrict trade without further safety objectives because they're applied beyond
Mhm.
the extent necessary to protect human, animal, or plant life or health. They are not based on science or maintained without sufficient scientific evidence. They said discriminatory licensing requirements, on and on and on. It's pretty interesting. They had labor, concerns with failures of government to protect internationally recognized worker rights. So this is something we also mentioned in that Teal episode, in which just the broader theory was that, and I think he actually mentioned it, is that theoretically, countries should not be running huge trade deficits. And if there is a trade deficit, that means something is wrong. And what he's kind of doing with this report here is he says, look, these are all the things that are wrong, and we need to set it right. And instead of trying to go
Mhm.
in and, maybe change around the policies or something from in their country, or for instance. So it's
Right.
not like we can go over to China, say, and start forcing them to change their labor laws or change their
Mhm.
environmental laws, although we've tried. They're just going to say, all right, well, we're just slap on a huge tariff. What I had initially thought, kind of when reading through this, was they would try to translate the individual trade barriers, like some of the ones that I had mentioned, like the differences in labor laws or something, and try to come up with a tariff that way. But they didn't. They didn't do that. All they did was, and they have the calculation for it. All they did was they said, okay, what is the trade deficit? And then what is the increase in price needed to get that trade deficit to zero by knocking demand from the US down? That's what they did. Look, there are Greek letters in here, which
Pretty fancy.
scare people away, including me. I gotta sort of, steel myself.
Yeah, it's starting to look a little like physics here.
So at the top, X is exports minus M, the imports. And then at the bottom, they're talking about the elasticity of imports with regard to prices. That next one, phi, is the pass through from tariffs to import prices. And then the last one is going to be imports. So I think, again, worth a whole episode. I'm not going to try to do this here. I was looking at this, and it's just very clear that they're taking the delta, like the distance that they need to travel in order to bring the exports and the imports together. And
Right.
then they're using that as the basis for how much the increase in tariffs need to be.
Right, because some of these variables are like highly subjective in how they could be interpreted, defined, calculated.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's what I was saying.
So the other thing that really stamps out is like, can you really believe that, across a single country, one single number for a tariff can apply to all the goods just across the board? I mean, that's ridiculous. We've looked at before the amount of trade goods and codes they have for the different products that cross these borders is huge, like thousands of different products. They're going to try to summarize it into a single number, a single tariff number. Forget it. And then on top
especially,
of that,
a country as big as the U.S., it's the biggest market in the world. It's just, it seems like such overkill just to slap a single number on it.
Yeah.
It's just such a blunt.
The amount of assumptions deep there are right there is already mind-boggling. But then on top of that, they also make super simple assumptions around the elasticity. So they literally just say the number. They say that epsilon number is 4. And then they give like 2 sentences or something at the bottom as to why it's 4. For everything, for all goods, all countries, all peoples, 4. And then, and then the next one, phi, right? So the pass through to prices. So they want to say, okay, it's not 1-to-1. It's not like if we slap a tariff on, then 100% of that gets transferred to prices to the goods. Okay, that's true.
We're adjusting these things to these
0.25.
These pass through effects
for all of them, all goods. So it's like, all right, we're making some pretty loose assumptions here.
And also, just like as an aside, I think the funniest part is, so it says, oh, the elasticity is near 2 in the long run. We'll be conservative and say 3 to 4. And then they say the next one is 0.25. So if they do,
it nets out to 1.
0.25 and 4, yeah, it's like they're not even there.
If you look at this, it's I mean, what they're describing, and I kind of didn't want to get into this, but what I think they're describing is a demand curve, and just kind of those downward sloping things, and they got to shift you over to the left,
right?
And they're going to do that by raising prices. But I think one of the errors here has to do with, and if you break it down, the change in tariff, all it is the distance that they had to travel divided by what the total import is. That's what it is. But that's not really what they want to do exactly. What they want to do is move the price number up a certain amount. And when you start doing that, the math works out to be a little bit different. I want to think about this a little more, but when I was first looking at this, I was like, these tariff numbers, if they want to stick with this theory, are way too low. I think they're way too low, because like 50% off of something is like 100% increase in it. So going from like 100 to 50, it's like a 50% drop. Going from 50 to 100 is a 100% increase.
It's like
directionally, last point, directionally, it's right. I think what's going on here is they need some analytical rigor and background to do what they intuitively feel is right.
Exactly.
So that 300 whatever page report, that's the analytical rigor. These Greek letters, analytical rigor. But he's been wanting to just raise these tariffs in order to, correct the trade deficit for literally decades. And I think what this is probably going to be is like directionally, it's right. I'm not opposed to it directionally. I think you can poke holes in the analytical rigor stuff, but it'll probably be kind of like an adjust as we go kind of deal, right? Where it's just like we're in startup mode. Learn, adjust, change quickly, whatever. And that's kind of dangerous because it gets a lot of egg on your face. Like you're under the spotlight and you're just making changes all the time. You're going to look dumb. But in the end, I think it's effective. What
do you mean whenever you say that? Because I don't think they're going to make any changes on their own. Now, the other big part of the messaging here is that, and this is something that Bessent started talking about quite a bit, these are like the maximum levels. Coming out very strong, being very blunt with this, showing people that, you're deadly serious about this.
Yeah.
We're not going to back down. We want to normalize things. So we can do it the easy way or the hard way.
Yeah.
We're going to start with the hard way, and we'll leave it up to you if you want to do it the easy way. And it's like, this is something, Luke, that you and I talked about a while back. It's like, who can get angry? It's like, why don't talk to us? Just go talk to them. If they lower it, we'll lower it.
I did hear him say that or something like that with reciprocal tariffs. It's very easy now to get angry because these are not there. You can't, these numbers are not apples to apples anymore. Right.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit
the Trump
chaotic.
Administration, from one perspective, put a number on the Chinese labor laws and the delta between the labor laws there and here. There they can get angry because it's kind of this thing that we do with studies and reports and whatever. We can always put in whatever assumption that we want to get the answer that we want. And that's
exactly.
where you get
and
people pissed off.
This is economics. That's basically what the field is, right? But this is politics. So it's like you said before, they already know what they wanted to do, or Trump has wanted this for a really long time.
Yeah,
he just had to back into it. He just talks to his guys. Okay,
right.
Let's put some constants in there to make it look fancy.
Yeah,
but
and he did make, like, to his credit, he did make, he made a lot of relevant points. Like, don't get me wrong. He commended the other countries for doing kind of what they were supposed to do, which is acting in their own interest.
Preparing to negotiate with some of these trading partners before that tariff rate comes into effect on April 9th?
Well, I think there have been a lot of discussions, but I think we're just going to have to wait and see what would happen. What I would say, Anne-Marie, is I would advise none of the countries to panic. I wouldn't try to retaliate, because as long as you don't retaliate, this is the high end of the number. And I think the market could have certainty that this is the number barring retaliation. So we've got a ceiling, and then we can see if there's a different floor.
But yeah, so it's like his main point that he came out with at first was that
that's a ceiling.
Don't panic, just
Don't
come
panic.
and negotiate with
it's
us.
It's a ceiling. Come and talk to us. And
but I'm also warning you, don't retaliate, else it won't be a ceiling anymore. So it's
true. Little,
you can do this the easy way or the hard way. It's a little bit of good cop, bad cop here. Bessent saying, "No, come on, just talk to us." Trump saying, "No, it's got to stop."
That's true. That's interesting. Yeah, he's trying to both calm the market seemingly, and then also like stay tough.
Right. And just like one of the other things, maybe I'm reading too far into it, but whenever she asked about what the level on China is going to be, she said, "Oh, you did 20%. I think that pre-existing it was about 10%. So he's since added 20 back in February, March." And the reciprocal is 34% on China. And whenever he presented these numbers, it wasn't clear are these in addition? Are these in replacement? And Bessent's answer to this was, I think they will. Just that these details
get me out of the camera.
were being decided last minute, really down to the wire. To the point where he's on TV shortly after that day saying,
well, no wonder why he's nervous then. If that's what he doesn't know what the answer is.
Yeah, he said, I think so.
Oh no.
But that once you think about it that way, it seems pretty tough. But at the same time, back on the campaign trail, Trump kept saying he was going to put 60% up to 60% tariffs on China.
Yeah,
and this would put him, right around 60.
To be fair, there's a very scientific TBBP index, the trade barrier by page index, which we came up with. Yeah, and so if you just take that same report we showed earlier, and you count the number of pages that were devoted to each country, I think China is like pushing 50 by far the highest, and then it was the next one up was the EU at like 35. And then the next one up was actually the Gulf Cooperation Council pushing 20.
Really?
And then India, Russia, Indonesia, and it kind of trailed off to just a couple pages apiece. But that's interesting. Yeah, China, I remember the first place I went to was China because I lived in China. I know a little bit about it. I want to start reading it. And I was like reading through it and I'm like, oh my God, how many pages is this?
Before he started doing all this, or like before we had this Liberation Day and the actual implementation, I was almost starting to think that he was going to like tone it down and start focusing a little more because he came out strong against Canada, Mexico, and China all together. And all of the early talks that he had, it didn't involve China at all. It was only about Mexico and Canada. Yeah, what's going to happen from here? So a little more context on what is going to happen. Let me swap over to another one here real quick. Problem is with these glasses, I can't see a damn thing.
So you have to understand, and this is what's difficult for your audience to understand, that tariffs are easy to understand, right? We have a 2.5% tariff on autos, and Europe has a 10% tariff, and other people have a 20% or 15% tariff. And that's sort of easy, so they can all come down. But it's the non-tariff trade barriers that are the difference. Some countries have a VAT, and they take that VAT tax of 20% and they use it to subsidize the production of their domestic industries.
The EU, 20%, 24% on Japan, 34% on China. Just what exactly was the methodology to go through all those different barriers to entry that you want to knock down? How did you come up with these numbers?
Well, the Council of Economic Advisors, the PhD economists of the administration, coupled with USTR, the United States Trade Representative, they publish a book called Trade Barriers, about this thick, right? And they've been analyzing for decades all of these different tools that these other economies use to hurt America, right? They won't take our corn in India. They won't.
Secretary, if we could just sit on the methodology just for a bit longer and address it directly. This is what we understand, what most people understand you did, that essentially you divided the country's trade surplus with the United States by the total exports and then divided the number by 2.
I didn't see a 2 in there, but like,
well, that was like the main thing at the end. They say they use that formula and then with that result, then they divide it by 2. to be nice. They said we should do this full amount, but we're only going to do half. So this is us being really nice. But one of the things that Lutnick was saying that I thought was interesting, and Bessent tries to talk about, just come negotiate with us. We'll figure it out. Whereas Lutnick was like, listen, people are going to have to change their trading system. It's gonna be difficult. It's going to take a long time. And he says something about that. This is a macro view. This is like going to change systemically how the trading system works.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways I had was to be convinced that the idea that we are kind of living in a world of free trade is wrong. And that's, I don't know, maybe my upbringing, my education, whatever it was. I thought we did have free trade.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm kind of convinced that is not true. So I think that's that's a big takeaway. We do not have free trade right now.
That's right.
We are not living in a world of free trade. Because we could take this angle of the U.S. is striving towards this ideal, but maybe the shining beacon on the hill, if you like.
The beacon to normalize trade.
But instead, we just kind of got taken advantage of this whole time. And I guess Trump's like, enough's enough. That's one angle. I mean, while I'm wearing this hat, that's the angle I guess I got to take.
I can see that shining beacon on the hill actually extra well right now.
Yes.
But
what prescription do you wear, Joe? It's not that American flag.
And now that's the big question. Like, is this going to work? If it does, how long is it going to take?
Yeah.
What's the collateral and economic damage along the way going to be? And I think that I was really personally hoping that he was going to soften things up a little bit, because if you change things this much, this quickly with every trading partner in the world, the U.S. is the world's largest market. This is affecting,
how you can fix
billions of people.
Knock down those trade barriers.
Yeah.
And build some factories in the U.S.
But the other tough thing is that even for the countries that do not have a trade surplus with the U.S., it's the ones he wants to target to close the deficits, everyone is still subject to a minimum 10%. And that's a really large amount.
I don't have an answer for that. Yeah.
If you do too much too quickly, you can really break things. And it almost feels like he's really playing with fire here.
I think he's trying to break things, though. It's not the goal.
Yeah. But I guess break as in this could put
the
world, the major economies of the world, i.e. the world, into a large recession. It just kind of self-inflicted. And the answer to that, at least I would argue, is that you just like what he was doing the first couple of months, just kind of picking on people left and right and, going through things. We'll figure it out. Some places like Mexico and Canada, he was actually, probably always knew he was going to be a little easier on, while at the same time he knew he was going to be tougher on China. And it felt a lot more, I guess, measured and benign overall doing it that way. Now it's like, nobody knows what's going to happen, but I think there's a non-zero chance that you could push a lot of places into recession quickly. And once you have dominoes starting to fall, that could be a major global economic issue. And it's just not clear just how deep the damage from that could go. I hope I'm really wrong with that, but who knows? Markets today certainly are not feeling very optimistic.
Depends what market, too.
Yeah.
One market is probably doing pretty well.
Every
safe assets are probably doing just fine. I think the treasury yields are down, right? As
basically every country's yields are down, but everything else,
long-term yields going down.
Yeah. Bessent got his wish. The 10-year treasury fell below.
There you go.
4%.
Just need to initiate a little flight to safety. Thanks for tuning in.
Happy Liberation Day, everyone.
Happy Liberation Day. We did it.
Still can't see anything.